Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Greetings, dear friends.
Здравствуй, Диана.
Hello, Diana.
Hello, friends. Today we are going to talk about panic attacks, because panic attacks have become a very common phenomenon these days and one of the most frequent reasons for seeking help. Now the questions about panic attacks are: how can you protect yourself from them? Are there any techniques, any effective ways of getting rid of panic attacks? They started to become asked more and more often. So we decided to have a conversation on this topic. Yes, there are effective ways to protect yourself from panic attacks nowadays, thanks to the knowledge about human dual nature, the knowledge shared by Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. This is the kind of knowledge that can protect anyone today from any kind of mental disorder, including panic attacks. Well, let's go in order, right? Let's start with what modern science tells us about panic attacks. It tells us this, that panic attacks are often a sudden, unreasonable surge of very intense anxiety or fear, which is accompanied by quite excruciating, rather very unpleasant sensations in the body, such as strong heartbeat, increased blood pressure, dizziness, a feeling of suffocation, nausea or diarrhea. It can be severe bouts of aches and pains in a certain part of the body, and many other things. There are also such comments that panic attacks are caused by a sudden and very powerful release of adrenaline into the bloodstream. And of course, when people hear such explanations, such comments, they have thoughts in their mind. I mean, look, a sudden release of adrenaline into the blood, a sudden surge of fear for no reason. And so one thinks, what's wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Why am I getting scared of all of a sudden for no reason? Or what's wrong with my body? Why does it start releasing this adrenaline? We, of course, have been taught, if you refer to psychology, to science, what says about it, that emotion is a reaction, our reaction to some external circumstances, right? But when we sit and think about something pleasant or unpleasant, something frightening or sad, we have emotions. And if we go back to situations, our emotional perception of the situation depends on what? On the thoughts we have in our heads that characterize that situation, right? And only when it sounds in our heads that this situation is dangerous, or it is uncomfortable, or it is untimely, or conversely a long-awaited one, only then do we have some kind of emotional reaction. And so when a person suddenly has this understanding like, well, how come? What is it? Why does my body suddenly start to react in this way? Why? How come I suddenly have these attacks of fear? Then they start explaining to us that panic attacks are a consequence of overloading the nervous system, due to the fact that a person, for example, often worries or is often stressed or is troubled about something. In other words, because we often experience the emotional fear unexpectedly, it begins to occur in us all of a sudden. But fear is an emotion, and an emotion cannot arise suddenly. It is always a consequence. But a consequence of what? The consequence of a thought in our head. We can often hear and read such explanations that a panic attack occurs because a person has some kind of emotional overload, stress, conflicts, or loss of a loved one. That is, some event happened that was stressful for a person, and that's why it became kind of a triggering mechanism for panic attacks. Or, for example, panic attacks can develop due to a physical overstrain because a person has some chronic diseases. And of course, panic attacks occur as a result of our incorrect lifestyle. Well, for example, a violation of a regime of sleep and rest due to lack of sleep. If a person often worries, if he is such a pessimist in life and is inclined to see everything in a negative light due to the fact that he drinks alcohol or because he smokes a lot and so on. And then what happens? Here I have listed everything that fills every person's life, every day of every person. And when people hear these multiple explanations that can cause panic attacks, of course they get lost. Well, that's the way I live, that's the way we all live. What to do? What do I start to change? And then, what do we begin to change? We are trying to change the situation and we influence people so they don't get on our nerves as much. But we have already come to the understanding that the best thing to do is to change your attitude towards situations. And what is an attitude? Again, the thoughts in our heads that tell us if this situation is good or bad, a person does something right or wrong, and so on. Until we have this comment in our head, we won't have any emotion. And then what do they suggest we do, particularly with panic attacks? Well, how to change the attitude? If a person who is experiencing a panic attack has thoughts such as, I probably have some kind of a fatal disease, I'm going to faint, lose consciousness, I won't have time to call an ambulance, and that's it, I'll die before they find me, and so on. So, in other words, the thoughts that cause this fear. He suggested to change to other thoughts. Everything is fine with me, I don't have any fatal disease. So, what does psychology propose to do? It suggests that the person should control the images and the thoughts in his head. It offers him control over a program called consciousness with absolutely no idea what the program is, how it functions, what its goals and objectives are, who created it in the first place, and for what purpose.
It is just like the principle of religious institutions. You just do it. But how? You just do it on faith. Instead of actually telling the person how this mechanism works and what these actions will lead to. After all, when you realize the whole chain of actions, their entire sequence, and you know that if you skip this thought control phase now, it will eventually make you have a panic attack.
Sasha, there is also a very interesting point here. Besides the fact that science knows nothing about what consciousness is, it also tells a person that he is a consciousness. Who is a human? It's my body and the thoughts in my head. But thoughts are a manifestation of the work of consciousness. And do you understand? So what happens? By the way, I also don't have any idea about my eye. And all these people, they don't know anything about it either. It reminds me of putting a 2-year-old child in front of the latest model of computer and telling him to create some program, to give him such a task and expect him to accomplish it. That's about it. So we are like confused children. We can't control the process which we don't have anything at all.
We are just pounding a keyboard randomly.
Of course, so are we clicking? That's another question. And look, it's a completely different situation if I know that consciousness is a program that manifests itself through images and thoughts that arise in our head. If I know the algorithm of this program, image, thought, emotion, reaction in the body, action. And most importantly, I know this program cannot function without my attention. And no matter how many pictures and thoughts it throws into my head, if I don't give them my attention, they will simply disappear like an illusion, like soap bubbles. Look how the whole situation changes at once.
Here comes a logical question about the scientific definition of the sudden release of adrenaline. In order for this sudden release to occur, There are other steps that must take place. That is, a person must put his attention into emotion, in other words, to live through this emotion. And before that, he had to put a great deal of attention into some thought that would trigger emotion, which will contribute to the release of adrenaline. So again, we're getting to the point that a person was investing his attention into fear.
Images and thoughts that trigger that fear. And so if I know all the things that I've just talked about, I understand what this program is, I understand how it works, then the situation immediately changes. I no longer have to deal with people or the situations. I understand that fear is an emotion that arises as a consequence of the thoughts in my head that I paid attention to. The only source of fear is thoughts and images in my head. The only source of fear is consciousness. And if I want to get rid of fear, if I want to get rid of these panic attacks, then I have to learn not to pay attention to those images and thoughts that provoke this emotion.
Indeed, people suffer and agonize most of their lives precisely because of fears. What is fear, my friends? Fear is a very powerful and strong emotion. I would say is the dominant emotion, and it is one of the main, let's call it a guard, one of the main guards in the way to spiritual liberation.
Right.
In fact, nothing stands in the way but foolishness, stupidity and fear towards gaining life by any human being. Therefore, yes, fear is the dominant emotion. Yet, what is the dominant emotion? Here, if we are to analyze it, we should analyze it in detail, right? Why are we afraid of something our whole lives? It doesn't matter of what. We are afraid of losing a job, ending a relationship. We are afraid of everything. Who produces fear? Consciousness. Personality has no function of fear. Personality cannot experience fear. If we approach this question more fundamentally and seriously, we should take into account the following factor. It is the main one. Personality. Yet, my friends, we are personality. That is, the one who finances everything, the one who lives, observes, and so on is personality. Not everyone understands this. Why? Not everyone feels free of consciousness. And when consciousness dominates over personality, a person cannot separate himself from it. I mean, he cannot even identify himself. He is not free. Why? Because consciousness lives instead of him. So for many people, I would say this is a bit of a shock. They say, how come? I actually think, these are my thoughts, I think, therefore I am.
I live, right?
Right, I live. Meaning, my thoughts are me. This is far from being true, my friends. This is said by people who have never really engaged in spiritual practices, who never worked on themselves in terms of spiritual development, or even simply in intellectual development. You know, sort of something new, right? Like sports, let's say, to try something new. So if even skeptics, even those people who cannot detach themselves from consciousness, would simply spare a few minutes a day to sit down and try to stop their thoughts, if you, my friend, are the master of your thoughts. If you are the thought, stop them. It's impossible.
Слушай, ну смотри, если так легко,
Look, if it's that easy, why isn't everyone able to do it?
Понимаешь, вот в том-то и весь вопрос. Я как раз и хотела это проговорить. Ведь и специалисты, и люди, которые страдают от панических атак, они понимают, что достаточно переключить внимание.
Because both specialists and people who suffer from panic attacks, they understand that it's enough to just shift their attention away from the thoughts they are focused on, that's actually causing this panic attack. And this panic attack is over. It just disappears. Well, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. it's very hard, it's very short-lived effect, and the panic attacks come back again. Why? Because there is no understanding of who controls that attention, how the process happens, and where it really needs to be redirected. Because what's suggested? They suggest switching the other thoughts. But the thing is that as soon as we give attention to any thought, we are submerged with our attention into the program of consciousness. We get sucked like a vacuum cleaner into the stream of images and thoughts in our head. That's when a person does not understand who is in control of this process. What kind of program is this? Who is this I that is listening to these thoughts? It's just a simple question. Who am I? Who is listening to these thoughts? When there is no understanding of where the fear comes from in the first place, it's simply impossible to control this process.
Well, there's another important aspect. At what point would such a switch be effective? Because when a person has already reached the phase action, that is when he gets overwhelmed by emotions and his consciousness shutting, it's all lost, and there's certain processes that are already going on at the physiological level, this is not easy to stop it at all.
Yes.
Why? Because, well, excuse me, but it's important to understand you kept investing bits of your attention like coins for a certain amount of time, so it accumulated there. And then you expect, well, if you set on the scale that you see the amount of attention invested to appear, and then expect you're going to put one coin to something else and it will overweight, no, consciousness will do what it's paid for. It's diligent and logical. If you paid to be afraid, I'll give you that fear. I'll give you that emotion of fear. I'll give the adrenaline to your body. You just pay. So if a person has reached the phase when this is all paid for, it's whole performance, because it really is a performance. And when a person really understands who he is, and okay, he made a mistake, and this performance unfolds in front of him, then just watch. Watch, observe, don't fuss. Because, well, as a rule, people start, oh, that's it, I'm good at that now, ambulance will come in time, no one's around, I can't reach my drugs, and so on. So, well, I mean, what's happened at that point? These thoughts keep pulling out the funding. They're pulling and pulling, and it's clear that if even especially tells him to switch to something good, thinking about the sun, about butterflies, the person tries to switch to the sun and to these butterflies, but it doesn't work. The amount of attention is just incomparable. While consciousness is like a diligent servant, a program, it will work. It will do what it's paid for.
When you understand this mechanism, when you have this experience, but I'm sitting here listening to you, and I recall this terrible, helpless state, even without any panic attack. It's just when you get angry, confused, or scared because you're worried about a child or someone, and you really don't know what to do. Why don't you know? You don't know who you are. How can you do that? Oh, so why am I saying all this? It seems like the audience can listen to us now and say, yeah, guys, don't mess with us. Give me techniques that you have. And we will do that.
The panic has started. Who should I call?
Specifically, if you know something, tell us. The entire point is that the prevention of panic attacks, protection against them, begins with the correct answer to the question, who am I? And until one understands that consciousness is a very tough program in relation to a human, this is the program that provokes in a person the emotion of fear. Until one figures it out, who is he? How can one control attention? What tremendous power lies in human attention in general, that everything depends on where he puts his attention on, and above all, on his state. It makes no sense to give any techniques or exercises until a person understands this. Yes, they exist, but who will perform them? The program. The program will not work against itself. That's why nothing works, and that's why it doesn't make sense guys, to learn some techniques or do exercises from morning till night. Nope. First, it's necessary to figure out how it all works in me. Where is the source of this fear? How can I get away from it, and where can I go? You just said, Sasha, that a person has panic, indeed panic, and there are very severe attacks, but it would seem sit down, calm down, switch it up, observe. Who is going to observe? And in order to have the experience of observation, it is necessary to learn to switch attention, but not to thoughts, which again draw your attention to the programs of consciousness. A person does not control this process. It instantly switches these good thoughts to bad ones, to any negative ones. And it is necessary to direct attention to the soul and feelings. And for that, I need to know that I have this soul. To do this, I need to know that I am personality, a spirit, and therefore I have a connection with the spiritual world, with the soul, and with the source of energy, vital energy, which we often call the energy of love. So love is the only alternative to fear. It is the only defense against it. Why? Now we have talked about this mechanism, and it becomes clear when we direct our attention to the soul and the flow of love that goes through it, we distract ourselves from these thoughts. They become sort of irrelevant. And that's when we get this kind of detached observation of those thoughts. But to make it clear, I'll explain it with an example. For example, you are driving a car. Your attention is on what? You are keeping your eyes on the road. It's your safety and the safety of your passengers. But you see some ads passing by, billboards with advertisements. You see goats and cows grazing somewhere in the meadow, but you do not turn to those goats and cows and look at what they are doing there. You are not starting to read these ads. If you do that, you will die, right? All your attention is on the road, and the rest are kind of passing by. So when you direct attention to the soul and feelings, the most important thing is that your attention is focused on them. And thoughts, yes, they are there. You observe them, and you can choose to give them up. Do I need this thought or not? Well, if you need it to, for example, a car is driving and I realize that my car is running out of gas and I need to pull up to a gas station and I see a gas station up ahead, I'll drive up, refuel and drive on my way. Likewise with a thought. If you need some thought, here is a reminder. Don't forget to pick up the child from kindergarten. Or don't forget to call someone. It's a business meeting. Okay, I accepted the thought and I moved on with my business, but my attention is on the soul. The most important thing is when we direct our attention to the soul, when we immerse ourselves in that real living thing that is inside each of us, we get an experience where there is a place where we can become, where there is no fear. That's when it becomes clear to a person where to go and why it is necessary to go to the feeling, to love.
Friends of mine, if you feel very bad, no matter what happened, the most terrible thing happened to you during your lifetime, that may happen to a human, and you, let's say, survived, you can analyze and think. It is good if you can perceive information as well. Then do not scold either God or the devil or anyone else. Do not scold anyone for what has happened to you or is happening right now, when there is no prospect for tomorrow. Do you know why? Because you yourselves bought what has happened or is happening to you. You paid for it all. Some people will say, "Oh no, what are you saying? I was good. I didn't even think about it, and I didn't order it." Recall. Sit down, calm down, and recall, and you will see that you knowingly pay in advance for everything that is happening. You know, it's like you buy a product that is supposed to come to you in a while, but you've already paid for it in advance. This is called a prepayment. The same is in this case. Far and wide, we prepay. And then we get what we don't want. And you shouldn't give way to despair. no matter what happens. I'll put it simply. Your life is your state of perception of your own consciousness. Pay consciousness only for good news, and you will have them. Pay for a good mood, and you will have it. Pay for health, and you will have it. But do not pay with everything you have to the last penny. Leave at least 10% of your attention in order to at least buy peace. This is valuable and important. You know, house slippers and new shoes are a huge difference. Think about that. Yet, it is even better, friends, honestly. You know, when you have an opportunity to buy a wonderful life here and an opportunity to buy eternal life, and not just eternal life, but eternal life in the spiritual world, in the world of our Lord God. What can be better, friends? In my opinion, nothing. And is it worth trading eternity among the most worthy ones for slavery to Satan? A simple question.
In order to get rid of panic attacks and to protect yourself from the possibility of their occurrence, it is necessary to start not with exercises and not with techniques. To do this, you have to start by answering the question, who am I? I have to be aware of my dual nature. I must be aware that I am personality connected to the soul, and through the soul, I'm connected to the world of God, to the spiritual world. And there is a constant flow of energy coming to me, the energy on which everything, any action in this material world depends, that energy without which my consciousness cannot work. And it is the only task of consciousness to take this energy away from me, from any human being, to take life. Because it's not just energy, it's a human's vital energy, the energy given to them to gain life. And consciousness does this in the most effective way when it provokes a person with emotion, especially the emotion of fear. And so when I know that I am real, that I am personality, a spirit, and have nothing to do with this dead program, it entirely depends on whether I pay attention to it or not, then the situation changes.
Logical question arises. So, the person has realized who he is and, well, consciousness is. So, what's next? Is that enough? Will that be enough? Or perhaps there's something else that needs to be done? Again, solely regarding panic attacks. I mean, to stop them or to interrupt them. So, all of that. I would like to understand, will awareness from answering the question, who am I, be enough?
Of course not. This is the beginning of the most important answer that everyone is waiting for. So what are the techniques and exercises? Once a person has figured out and understood that in order for them to learn not to get involved in these panic attacks, they need to make a decision and understand that they need to separate themselves from this dead program. And after this step, you can move on to those exercises, methods, and practices that allow you to do this. And the first thing to start with is relaxation. You have to learn to relax. The second thing you need is to learn to write down thoughts. We have talked today about the algorithm of consciousness, an image, a thought, an emotion, reaction, and the body action. So when one writes down thoughts, he breaks this chain of formation from thought to action. In other words, when you hear such thoughts in your head, no, I can't go home earlier because when no one is there, it is at this moment that I will have a panic attack and something will happen to me and I will die. And the person can spend hours circling around the house, not coming home until some family members comes. Right? And instead, it would be best if you sit on a bench, take out a notebook and a pen and write down these thoughts. to write down thoughts that I can't ride in an elevator because the elevator will definitely stop, break down, I will suffocate, and they won't have time to save me. And the person begins to run through the floors, and at the same time, his heart rate quickens, and the following thought appears: since my heart is beating so hard,
Look at my heart pounding so much.
I'm about to have another panic attack, and these are endless chains that consciousness leads a person. In order to avoid this, you need to write the thoughts down instead of listening to them, investing attention and being drawn into those attacks of fear. Because what else characterizes panic attacks? The fear increases from the beginning of the attack and grows toward its end. Why? The more a person listens to these thoughts, the more he is frightened, and the more the next thought spurs on a new portion of fear. That's it. But when we write them down, and when you talk to people, they already know. For example, when he is at work, he already has pictures of how he'll get home and how the evening will come. And panic attacks most often develop in the evening. Or, for example, when he sits and starts worrying that he has to take the subway because other transportation is now overloaded. And in the subway, he will definitely develop a panic attack. There is no need to pay for these expectations.
So consciousness already prepares this in advance.
Yes, I mean, that's all start, and everybody knows when this process starts.
In other words, any panic attack starts with a thought anyway, right?
From the image, from the picture. First, the picture is thrown in. For example, if a person was at an event for the first time and he, as the person in charge, was organizing it, and suddenly by the end of the event, when everything seemed fine, he could relax and calm down, his blood pressure suddenly rises, his heart starts pounding, he gets dizzy, and everyone thinks it's a heart attack and calls an ambulance. This has never happened before, and it's just caused by overexertion, by the excitement on the eve of the event, and maybe added to that by worrying about someone in his family, and maybe those attacks of excitement and fear accumulated, and as well as sleepless nights before preparation, and the body reacted this way. It's really an overwhelming thing, but a person has fixed it. That's terrible. I've never had that before. And the next time, for example, when he is at some other important event, he may get just this picture that something like this has already happened. And now I'm nervous too. What if I had it again? And so on. At first, it throws in a familiar picture in advance, for example, that it happened in the subway or somewhere in the street, anywhere. It could be a real situation, such as a girl being chased by a man when she returned home alone late at night. And it's good that she managed to escape, and she really experienced a very strong fear, but she survived. But after that, for a long time, she has these images that if she walks down the street and no one is around, then surely someone will attack her.
So see how consciousness uses memories, experience in a very masterful way. Whenever it needs, it erases. It didn't happen, I don't remember that,
I needed memory, right?
Right, even if you recall a person's name, right? You met him just a few minutes ago. You're sitting thinking, what is his name? Whose name is this? And here, it remembers in detail all these situations because they were powerful and vivid. And it quickly pushes them to a person in order to get fun again, bring a person to fear. Right.
Поэтому вот, пожалуйста, эффективно.
That is why it's an effective way. But if a person does not know who is supposed to perform it, why is it so important to him, right? It is not only a defense against this panic attack, but it's also generally the price of your life to protect yourself from this beast, to detach from it and separate yourself from it. This beast will never let you do this exercise. I already have this experience. I've seen people trying. No, I don't want to get into this dual nature of a human. I don't want to know about any soul. Give me exercise.
What do I do precisely?
И если расслабление
Yes, specific exercise. And if people do relaxation for a while, not for a long time, but they do it, then the exercise of writing down thoughts, consciousness will never let you do it. There will be 105 explanations, but the person will not follow it. But it's very effective.
So one of the simplest tests turned out to be the most difficult one.
вызывает удивление. Ну как?
Yes, and this is also surprising. How is it? It seems to be a simple exercise, but people say, oh, you know, well, it's just so difficult to do it.
What am I, a little one working around with a pencil writing down the thoughts, right?
Объяснений много.
It's not the most common explanation, but there are many explanations, up to the point that I forgot. It doesn't work out. I don't know how to write a dictation, and so on.
And yet people don't ask themselves the question, why is such resistance there?
Вот что значит быть во власти этой
They
программы.
don't ask, and that's what that means, to be at the mercy of this program. After all, it just doesn't make sense to do anything else. The next step, many practices and meditative techniques allow you to learn how to manage your attention. That's what they are aiming at, right? To let a person get the experience that thoughts are not his.
Очень хорошо.
It becomes very understandable and obvious to anyone when there is a clear technique for doing meditation. You need to sit down, relax, and not think about anything. And that's it. And then you realize that you cannot help but think. And then at least a person has doubts. What is it?
Как же так?
How could it be? It's me, my thoughts. I have to manage this process.
Существует следующий.
And then there is the next stage. There are spiritual practices. Spiritual practices, in particular the practice of the lotus, allow a person to gain a real experience of feelings and be able to understand who am I, find yourself, find out how it is to be alive, how it is to feel, not to be emotional, but to feel.
И вот то, о чем я сегодня
And that's what I was talking earlier today. Getting an experience where you can escape from fear.
Но кто ее будет выполнять?
Получить опыт
But
того
who is
места,
going to perform it?
To get the experience of a place when there is no fear at all,
There is no fear at all, of course.
regardless of what's going on around you and even the outside world, right? Because psychology focuses people on external things, stresses on negative experience, and so on and so forth. Even when a person is really in a stressful situation, right? But he knows very well that he is a spirit, that there is soul, that the most important and the only thing he can do in this situation is to be connected with his soul, where it is quiet and peaceful. Then his actions in the outside world will be completely different. No fuss, no panic, and his actions will be accurate, precise, balanced. Why? Because he understands who makes the decisions and who will implement the decision, and not, to sway back and forth. Oh, boss, it's all gone.
И это уже личный опыт человека.
Of course. And this is already a personal experience of a person, and you don't have to convince him of anything, right? On the contrary, he has a desire to learn even more. He gets an understanding of choice and what kind of choice each person really needs to make. All this is entirely different, because if a person does not want to deal with all this, then who will perform the spiritual practice? Consciousness? No, it can't. It does not have the ability to learn, to feel, and so on. In fact, all of these practices that I am talking about are described in the books by Anastasia Novik. And in Allatra book,
Человек может
a person can
получить знания,
gain knowledge and complete information about how he is built, how his energy structure is constructed. That's what else is very important to understand. A human being is not just a body, not just thoughts in his head. We have already said he's also a spirit, he's also a soul, and it's all located somewhere. Guys, it's not in the body.
When you say that consciousness is inside of you, it doesn't mean that you should search for it inside your own body using some modern diagnostic methods,
Of course, even consciousness is outside of a person's body, in a person's energy structure. In fact, the practices described in the Allatra book, and in particular the practice Chetverik, allows a person to study how his energy structure works. And so the regular execution of all these practices, starting with relaxation, this is what allows a person to become free and independent from fear attacks. And to be free from fear means to be free from any kind of mental disorder, because fear is the root of all of our states related to mental disorders, so to speak.
Я вот понимаю, что
I realize that now, unfortunately, we live in a consumerist format where psychology serves completely different interests. That is, it simply defends the postulates of the system. But, just for the sake of an experiment, it would be interesting to give it a try. Let's take two groups of people, well, just an idea of sorts, and or maybe even three groups of people. Yeah, three is better, I think. For the purity of the experiment, that would be even better. So, one group of people, it would work, well, these are people who have faced a panic attack. That is, they have them in their lives in a certain regularity, and so they are given the methods of modern psychology, some period of observation over them. Another group of people do, let's say, a relaxation technique and a spiritual practice of lotus. And the third group of people who do relaxation, lotus and Chetverik.
все эти три группы, они подвержены.
And they write down thoughts.
Right, and so once again, all three of these groups are prone to, and they record the thoughts, they're prone to panic attacks, meaning they have them. And let's take, I don't know how much time it will be, but so that experts would observe it and record the results. And again, it's clear that in our consumer society, unfortunately, we are unlikely to be able to conduct such an experiment. We need to find.
But that's very interesting.
Yeah, we will definitely prove a lot, at least the failure of psychology as a science. The current time.
The most important thing, it would show a real perspective for all people, which is very important. Sasha, and I'm sorry, I want to add this clarification of writing down thoughts, why it is very, very important. In order to want to detach myself from something, I have to realize that I don't like it, that it's awful, disgusting, and I don't need it. And so in order to see the essence of what consciousness is, you really have to learn to write down the thoughts that sound in our head like a dictation. And then you will see all the awfulness of this program, this beastly essence of it. And then anyone will want to separate from it. No need to be persuaded. You yourself will want to do this exercise in order to get rid of what makes you a beast, makes you miserable, plunges you into these attacks of fear, attacks of madness, in fact. But you know, Sasha, I have one more suggestion for specialists, since this topic has already started. Among the many external circumstances that specialists point out, all specialists pay attention to the fact that the level of fear and anxiety is very high in society. And that level of fear and anxiety, of course, contributes to, they see this correlation between the level of anxiety in society and the growth of diseases like depression, panic attack, all kinds of phobic disorders, schizophrenia, obsessive-compulsive disorders, and so on, that they see this correlation. I would offer my colleagues, to remember that a doctor's main task is saving human life. And today, when each second, every person's life is absolutely really threatened. No one, no child is safe, and it is an absolute real threat. It isn't some irrational fear. then how can we help people to get away from this anxiety, from this fear? I don't know. We have just talked about the fact that a person must take care of himself, to start studying himself, to get engaged in quite serious work on oneself. How can people who have, shells whizzing over their heads, who see children die before their eyes every day, do this work on themselves today? How can people who are in climate disasters, abandoned to the mercy of fate, do this work on themselves? They have nothing to drink and nothing to eat. How can they?
Or in a refugee camp.
Or in a refugee camp, or a family that's in credit slavery, and they realize that if they do not pay back the loan tomorrow, they are all going to die. Or people who have nothing to eat, or people who have nowhere to live, or family who have no money to treat a child. Tell me, please, do you know what to tell them? I don't. No. And so the only main task I see right now, both for myself and for all of us colleagues, is to study the Creative Society project and to tell everybody about it all the time, to inform all my patients. You know, at the forum that was held on May 7, 2022, We Are People, We Want to Live, which was interpreted into 100 languages and lasted 11 hours live. That's the kind of idea that was voiced. And what was it about? We have a large percentage of the adult human population in the world who are believers. And so if priests of all religions, all denominations made their main sermon today as an information message, a story about the Creative Society that would inform people. And that, by the way, is what all the prophets dreamed of. This is the society that Jesus, Buddha, the Prophet Muhammad spoke of. This is what is bequeathed to us through all the spiritual traditions. So if they did this every day, so that is, this preaching would become mainstream, then all people would learn about the Creative Society very quickly. And you know what idea I have? If believers today, not everyone, not all people in the world go to temple. There is not a single person who doesn't go to the doctor. And if not all believers go to temples, there isn't a person who doesn't visit a doctor. So if we all studied the Creative Society project, became active participants in it, and told all of our patients about the Creative Society, then within a month, I guess, the whole world would know that there is the only project today that can really protect our lives, make it safe, give a guarantee of the safety of human life anywhere in the world. This is the Creative Society project. We could very quickly notify this world, and I don't know of a more important, I would say even noble mission today for any human being and for any physician. Even more so, because today's main request to us, to psychiatrists, to psychologists, to psychotherapists, is a question from people: how to live without fear? Is it possible to get rid of fear for your life? It is possible to build the Creative Society. So I think that the topic of the Creative Society should be the main topic of our conversation, friends. If you want to protect yourself from attacks of this insane fear, let's change the conditions. Let's change the conditions in which we will feel comfortable, secure, when we won't be told by specialists you have a sudden anxiety attack because you are often worried, anxious, and afraid. Let's get those circumstances out of the way first of all. And let's all work on ourselves, have this wonderful experience of acquiring life.
How to inform all people. In fact, friends, it's very simple. Very simple. But it would be good for each and every one of us to invest our own attention in this matter.
Right.
I mean, together, we would find a lot of other ways that we ourselves are unaware of at the moment.
We are unaware of, right.
Isn't that right?
It is. Because when people meet to have a coffee or something else,
Anywhere,
what do they talk about?
about anything.
Currently about problems.
Simply about problems, about something.
Look, everybody talks about problems.
Yes.
They
But
do.
what if we talk about prospects?
About solutions.
Exactly. I just wanted to say that.
Great, wonderful. There is a huge difference.
Perhaps it's better to tell them about prospects, of course, and about those prospects which are real. And tomorrow, all of that can be our reality.
Yes.
That's also an option.
Yes, of course.
Just look, friends, it's very simple, and a lot can be solved if we have a desire, if we properly invest our attention in the right goal, right?
Right.
So what does the problem consist in? In allocating our attention, right?
Right.
Right.
If we really want something, we will succeed. We just need to...
Invest our attention in that.
Absolutely right, friends.
Not to be afraid.
And not to be afraid.
Right.
So friends, stop being afraid, and everything will be fine.